Hi everyone and welcome to this week's garden update. I'm currently under our orange tree because it's absolutely pouring down rain and I'm trying to get a bit of shelter. But speaking of the weather, we've had a real mix this week, including some really strong winds, plus a couple of mornings with heavy frost. The girls have just appeared. Okay, I'll just carry on. So with this different weather we have been experiencing, I'll show you how it's affected my garden. Plus we'll take a look at some lavender in bloom, some vegetables and flowering plants that are growing nicely in the raised beds, and we'll do another update of the greenhouse. So please just sit back and relax for a few minutes and let's get into it now. I just picked this little bunch of lavender from a few plants growing up near our back door. I'll leave it there for the moment on top of this bok choy and we'll go over and take a look at the patch. Here it is, flowering in winter. This variety is called Lavender dentata or French lavender. It's got this beautiful silver foliage and the plant itself reaches up to about 60 centimetres in height. As far as I can remember, in this little patch here I have about 3 plants. I better go and grab this lavender before I forget about it and leave it out here overnight. I have to say, in my experience here in New South Wales in my garden, this variety, the dentata, seems to be the toughest, most drought resistant, disease resistant. The plants themselves last such a long time. And did you know that lavender is actually edible as well? It can be used in a lot of different dishes, particularly baking and drinks too. The sun has just gone behind the trees in the distance and I know it won't be long until it gets really cold here. And speaking of cold, you should have seen it this morning when I came out here. All of these seedlings were covered in frost and lots of other places in the garden. I actually took my camera with me and recorded a bit of footage, so let's go and take a look at that now. Despite what you just saw there, I have a bit of good news. Most of those plants that had frost on them haven't been damaged too much at all. Maybe a few leaves have fallen off and frozen over. Here I have a few leeks in this little section, plus some weeds I need to get on top of. And beside them I have a couple of celery plants just over here. You may remember last year I grew way too much celery, even giving it away and dehydrating it and trying to use it all up. It was just way too much. I think I grew maybe about 8 or 9 plants. So this year I've just stuck to 2 and I think that's going to be more than sufficient. I haven't actually harvested any of this yet. I'm just waiting for the stems to get a little bit bigger. They're still quite small, although you can use them at this stage too. They're perfectly fine, particularly if you're going to use it in soups where it gets blended up anyway. In this section I have some rocket. I have to say it's a little bit too spicy for my kids, especially my youngest one, but I do like rocket, and it's one of those kind of vegetables that you grow because buying it in the supermarket is just so expensive. Growing it is super easy and it's quite abundant too. In a small space you can grow more than enough for a family of 5. In this bed I have a few Asian greens. There's a lot of self-seeded pansies, and here I still have these beautiful pincushion tall mix. Here are a few primulas. It's kind of hard to tell one plant from the other at the moment because there's no flowers, it's mostly foliage, although I do see a little flower bud on it there. Primulas grow really well in my area. They're mostly flower in early spring, late winter. It really does add a lovely bit of colour into the garden, but not much to look at the moment. And then also in this bed it got scratched up by the chickens. I'm just like, I know it's all my fault because I don't kind of keep them in their designated area. but they've scratched up all my ranunculus. I've only got maybe 2 or 3 plants left in here. However, I do have an entire tray of them over near the little greenhouse. Let's go and take a look at them now. Actually, quickly, a couple of things to show you before we leave the raised beds. This one here is full of those heirloom carrots. Haven't shown them to you in a while, but they have grown slightly. Some of them are poking up over the mesh. But as I said before, this area, this bed, won't really see any decent growth now until spring when the weather warms up. Here's one of the nasturtium plants which you just saw from earlier on that was covered in frost. You can see that it did quite a bit of damage here. A lot of these leaves have just kind of gone to mush at this stage, but I'm not concerned because you know what? There's still a bit of green growth here at the base. I think this is going to be fine. It will bounce back unless we get a really harsh frost. I think this plant will overwinter well. And finally, before we leave this area, here's that jade plant. It's had a lot of damage. I forgot to put a cover on it. I actually didn't check the weather forecast, which I'm usually quite diligent about, but I just didn't this week. And you know, this is what happens, but I'm not too concerned. Again, like the nasturtium, this will bounce back. I actually one year had this entire plant completely get frost damage. I had to cut it back almost to the base and it came back. I'm now over by the greenhouse where I have a lot of edible crops growing in containers. This is also where I have my tray of ranunculus just down here, and look what's happening. I'm getting green shoots pop up. I've got a couple of different varieties growing in here. This one's a nice mix of colours, and then the other one, let me just see if I can find the label. Yep, bear with me. There you go. It's lovely kind of dark red wine colour. There's a few more additions in this greenhouse. I found some seedlings around the garden. These are an annual chrysanthemum. I dug them up and they were growing near the pathway, which wasn't really ideal for them, so I just potted them on in here and I'll find a good place for them. Over in this container is a Shasta daisy. I saw this growing in a different section. It was just kind of like a rogue one. I'll pull it out and show you. And when I took it out of the ground, it had a nice root system. If I can get that one to, you know, establish in this little container, it means I might just be able to get a second Shasta daisy patch in the garden. They make really nice cut flowers. And then at the back here, I don't think I showed you this last week. I must have done it since I've seen you last. This is just a little tray of the purple poppies that I transplanted into here. They came from this container here. It still is quite full, but I must have taken out a lot of little plants from here. Most of them just got chucked away, but I saved those 6. And I reckon with a pot container this size, really I should only have about 5 plants. So the more thinning I'm going to do now, I'll probably continue to put these into smaller pots, and then eventually what I'll do with them is, you know, the usual, transfer them elsewhere in the garden. Do you know what? I actually don't think that this here is a poppy seedling. The foliage doesn't look quite right. Maybe it's a rogue seed that made its way in here. As I mentioned at the very beginning of this video, we had some strong winds this week. I've had quite a lot of big branches from our large Grevillea robustus fall onto the ground. And when I say large, really it's not much bigger than this one here, which isn't too bad. We actually had an arborist come out a few years ago. He inspected all the trees on our property, trimming back any dead branches, but it may actually be time now to have him come out again and just do another inspection. We also had one large branch snap off the wattle tree that I showed you last week. All I need to do here is just come in with the saw, cut this off. I might need to cover this up with something to protect it from infection, and you know, it is what it is. There's still plenty of other branches on it which are covered in buds. We've now come to the end of this week's garden update. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all again next Friday.